Detroit. The morning of June 1st, 2009, the largest automaker the world had ever produced walked into a New York courtroom and filed for bankruptcy. Not a startup, not a fad. General Motors, the company that put America on wheels, that outsold every rival on earth for 77 straight years, that once employed more people than some countries had citizens. Chapter 11, one of the largest industrial bankruptcies in the history of the United States. And here's the part that should stop you cold. It did not die in a fire. There was no single fraud, no exploding product, no CEO let out in handcuffs. GM was still building millions of cars. People were still buying them. The plants were still running. So how does a company that big, that dominant, that busy end up insolvent? The easy answer was everywhere that spring. The recession did it, the credit crisis. The banks froze, car sales collapsed, and Detroit went down with everyone else, and there is truth in that. But it is the kind of truth that explains the timing and hides the cause, because GM had survived recessions before. It survived the oil shocks, it survived the 80s, it survived Japan arriving on its doorstep. So the real question is not why GM struggled in 2008. The question is why, this time, it could not get up. The answer was not in the showroom. It was on the balance sheet, in a stack of promises the company had been making for 50 years. Promises made in good times, promises that came due in bad ones. Every car GM built rolled off the line carrying a weight the buyer never saw, a weight the competition did not carry. And by 2009, that weight was heavier than the car. This is the anatomy of General Motors. We diagnose every collapse with four forces: market, the customers, the category, whether people still wanted what the company sold, money, the balance sheet, the debt, the fixed obligations, the cost of simply existing, management, the decisions, the deferrals, the culture that made those choices seem reasonable. And moment, the shock, the timing, the outside event that finally forces the reckoning. Every failure has all four. The job is to find the one that was decisive. For General Motors, the market was real, the moment was brutal, the management was flawed for decades, but the force that decided the outcome was money, not cash flow, not a bad quarter. The structure of what GM owed, fixed promises stacked for half a century, that made it impossible to be profitable at the volumes of downturned forces. Money's decisive. Watch how. Start where most people think the story lives, the product. The popular verdict on GM is short and cruel. They made bad cars, American junk, rust buckets that lost to Toyota and Honda on quality and deserved to, huh? And if that were the whole story, this would be a simple episode. Bad product, dead company, case closed. But look at the actual numbers, and the simple story falls apart. In its final year before bankruptcy, General Motors sold millions of vehicles. Millions. It was, for most of the 2000s, still the largest or second largest automaker on the planet, trading the global sales crown back and forth with Toyota. This was not a company nobody wanted to buy from. In the middle of its own death spiral, GM was moving more metal than almost anyone alive, and some of it was genuinely good. The full-size pickups, the Silverado, the Sierra, were legitimate, profitable, best-in-class trucks that print money to this day. The big SUVs sold like the mortgage was already paid. GM's problem was never that America stopped buying GM. So where was the rot? In the market, not in demand, in mix and in margin. Here's the trap. The trucks and SUVs made real money. The cars, the sedans, the compacts, the economy models often did not. And when gas prices spiked in 2008, the profitable half of the lineup, the big thirsty half, cooled fast, while the unprofitable half was where buyers fled. GM was strongest exactly where the market was retreating, and weakest exactly where it was heading. And the brands. This is where the market story turns strange. GM did not sell under one name or two. It sold under Chevrolet, Pontiac, Buick, Cadillac, GMC, Saturn, Hummer, Saab. 8 badges, overlapping, competing with each other for the same customer, in the same price band, on the same street corner. A Pontiac and a Chevrolet that were underneath the skin, nearly the same car, wearing different grills, fighting over the same buyer. That is not a product problem. Hold that thought, because It is really a money problem wearing a market costume, and we will come back to it. The verdict on market is this: real but not the killer. People still wanted cars. They still bought GM's cars by the million. The demand was there. The category was healthy. Whatever went wrong at General Motors, it did not go wrong because the world stopped needing what it made. The market gave GM every chance to survive. Something else spin it. Now we get to the weight. To understand why General Motors could not survive a downturn it had survived before, you have to understand a phrase that sounds like accounting and behaves like gravity. Legacy costs. Here's the mechanism, and it is the whole episode, so let me build it slowly. For most of the 20th century, GM was not just enormous, it was generous. Because it could afford to be, and because a strong union made sure it was. Across the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, the company signed contract after contract promising its workers extraordinary things, not just wages, pensions for life, and health care. For the worker, for the worker's family, and critically, for the worker after they retired, for the rest of their life. In a boom with a young workforce and money pouring in, that is a rounding error. It is a handshake, a good year, a company being good to its people. Nobody's doing the math on what it costs in 40 years. But run the clock forward. Because GM was so old and so vast, it eventually had far more retirees drawing benefits than active workers building cars. Picture that. For every person on the line making a vehicle, there were, at the worst of it, several people no longer working, collecting a pension, collecting health care that GM had promised and GM still owed. The company was, in a real sense, an enormous pension and health care fund that happened to build automobiles on the side. And someone has to pay for that. Where does the money come from? It comes from the cars. Every single vehicle that rolled off a GM line had to carry a slice of that retiree burden baked into its cost. Analysts and executives at the time reached for a number to make it concrete. And the figure that got repeated, and I want to be careful here, this was a widely reported estimate, not a precise line item, was somewhere on the order of $1,500 to $2,000 per car. Sit with that. Before a GM vehicle had an engine, a paint job, a dealer, a dime of profit, it was already carrying something like $1,500, maybe $2,000 of pure legacy cost, a weight bolted to the frame at the factory door. Now here's the killer comparison: Toyota. Building cars in America, Honda, building cars in America, they were younger. Their U.S. plants were newer, their workforces leaner, their retiree armies a fraction of the size. They did not carry that same weight. So on two nearly identical cars, same steel, same segment, same sticker price, GM started somewhere on the order of $1,000+ behind before the race even began. Every car, every year, millions of times over. You cannot out-engineer that. You cannot out-market it. A structural cost disadvantage of that size on every unit is not a problem you fix with a better ad campaign or sharper design. It is a headwind that never stops blowing. And it was worse than pensions and healthcare because there was the Jobs Bank. The Jobs Bank was a provision the company had agreed to that did something almost unbelievable when you say it out loud. When GM idled a plant, when there was no work, no demand, no car to build, laid-off union workers did not simply lose their income. They kept collecting most of their pay to sit, to wait. In some cases, to show up and do nothing. Think about what that does to a business. The entire point of a downturn is that you are supposed to be able to shrink, cut production, cut cost, ride it out lean until demand returns. The Jobs Bank took that lever and welded it in place. GM could stop building cars, could not stop paying to build them. Its costs did not fall when its sales did. In the one moment a company most needs to get lighter, GM was contractually forbidden from setting the weight down. And now go back to those 8 brands: Pontiac, Saturn, Hummer, Saab, and the rest. Every brand is not just a logo, it is engineering budgets, factories, dealer networks, marketing, management, fixed costs duplicated again and again, spread across badges that were fighting each other for the same customer. Money that a focused rival poured into 2 or 3 great cars, GM smeared across 8 overlapping ones. That is the market problem I told you to hold. It was never really about the grills. It was about the fixed cost of carrying all of them, so stack it up. Pensions owed for life, healthcare owed for life, a retiree population that dwarfed the active workforce, a jobs bank that paid people not to work, a brand sprawl that multiplied fixed cost across the whole enterprise. None of this was a bad quarter. None of it was the recession. All of it was structural. Promises made in good years that hardened into obligations owed in every year that followed, good or bad. This is why the balance sheet is decisive, because a healthy company meets a recession by getting smaller and cheaper until the storm passes. GM had spent 50 years making that impossible. It had converted the flexibility every business needs to survive a downturn into a mountain of fixed promises it could not put down. GM did not go bankrupt in 2009. It went insolvent in slow motion over decades, one generous contract at a time. 2009 is just the year the arithmetic finally came due. The verdict on money is the verdict on the whole company. Decisive. The obligations, not the moment, decided the outcome. But money like that does not accumulate by accident. Somebody signed every one of those promises. So let's talk about the decisions. Here's what makes GM's management story so uncomfortable. For the most part, no single leader did anything insane. There is no cartoon villain here. What you find instead is 50 years of reasonable people making reasonable seeming choices, each one of which deferred a cost onto a future that eventually arrived. Go back to the negotiating table in the good decades. A union asked for richer pensions, better retiree health care, the jobs bank. Management faces a choice: fight it and risk a strike that shuts down the plants and hand sales straight to your rivals during a boom, or grant it and keep the line running, keep the profits flowing, and push the true cost of that promise decades down the road onto executives who are not you, and quarterly earnings that are not yours to answer for. Over and over, GM's leadership chose to keep the line running, and you can understand why. In the moment, in that year, it was often the profitable choice, the responsible choice even. Peace on the factory floor, cars out the door. But every one of those handshakes was a mortgage on the company's future, and management kept signing because the bill never came due on their watch until it did. Then there was complexity. The 8-brand sprawl did not fall from the sky either. It was defended budget cycle after budget cycle by managers who could always find a reason to keep one more badge alive. The dealers, the loyalists, the internal politics of a company where Pontiac and Chevrolet had their own fiefdoms. Killing a brand is painful and public. Keeping it is easy and quiet. So they kept them, all of them, for decades longer than the math allowed. And there was the deeper cultural failure, the one underneath all of it. GM had been the biggest for so long that bigness became the assumption. The company ran for years as if its dominance were a law of nature rather than a thing that had to be earned every quarter against leaner, hungrier competitors. That complacency is what let the legacy costs pile up unchallenged, because when you are certain you will always be enormous and always be profitable, a promise you can only afford at enormous scale does not feel like a risk. It feels like Tuesday. Which brings us to the end of the road and the most personal management moment of the whole story. When GM finally came to Washington, hat in hand, asking for the tens of billions it needed to survive, the government attached conditions, and one of them was a name. The CEO, Rick Wagner, was pushed out, effectively forced from the company as a condition of the aid. A career GM man at the top of the largest automaker on earth, removed not by his board and not by his shareholders, but by the federal government as the price of a rescue. The verdict on management is this: guilty, but as an amplifier, not the trigger. Management did not create a single bad year that killed GM. What it did was worse and slower. It built the cost structure, decision by reasonable decision, that made survival impossible. They didn't fire the gun. Over 50 years, they loaded it. So if the weight had been growing for 50 years, why 2009? Why then? Because that is what the moment does. The moment doesn't create the disease, it exposes it. The fall of 2008, the financial crisis, Lehman Brothers collapses, credit markets seize, and the entire global economy grabs its chest, and two things happen at once to General Motors. Two things that together are precisely the conditions its balance sheet could not survive. First, the credit freeze. Understand how most cars are actually bought. Not with cash, with a loan. The customer borrows, the dealer finances inventory, GM's own lending arm keeps the whole chain of money moving. When credit froze in 2008, that machinery locked up. Buyers who wanted a car and could afford a car suddenly could not get the loan to drive one home. The financing that sold vehicles simply stopped. Second, and immediately, sales fell off a cliff. Auto sales in the United States collapsed to levels not seen in decades. The showroom went quiet across the entire industry all at once. Now, a normal, healthy car maker takes a punch like that and staggers. Toyota lost money in that stretch too. Everyone bled. But a leaner company bleeds and survives because when sales drop, its costs drop with them. It builds fewer cars, spends less, waits out the storm. GM could not do that. This is where every earlier force detonates at once. When GM's sales collapsed, its costs did not follow because so much of what GM owed was fixed. The pension still had to be paid. The retiree health care still had to be paid. The jobs bank still paid idled workers. The 8 brands still cost what they cost. The weight did not get lighter when the cars stopped selling. The weight never gets lighter. That is the entire point of a fixed obligation. So a shock that a leaner rival could absorb was, for General Motors, fatal. Not because the shock was uniquely aimed at GM, but because GM was uniquely unable to shrink to meet it. The credit crisis didn't build the trap. It just slammed it shut. The verdict on moment is this: the trigger, not the cause. The recession was real and the recession was savage. But it did not decide the outcome. It only chose the date. Hand GM a leaner balance sheet, and 2008 is a terrible year it survives. Hand it the balance sheet it actually had, and 2008 is the year the bill for 50 years finally arrived. 4 forces, 1 company on the courtroom floor. Let's rule on each. Market. Real, not the killer. People still wanted cars, still bought GM's cars by the million. Demand didn't fail. Demand gave GM every chance. Money, decisive, half a century of fixed promises, pensions and healthcare owed for life to a retiree army larger than the workforce, a jobs bank that paid people not to work, brand sprawl that multiplied fixed cost, a per vehicle weight reportedly on the order of $1,500 to $2,000 that no engineering could erase. This is what made survival impossible. Management. Guilty as amplifier. Not one fatal decision, but 50 years of reasonable ones. Each deferring a cost onto a future that finally showed up. They didn't fire the gun, they loaded it. Moment. The trigger, not the cause. The 2008 credit crisis chose the date. It did not write the sentence. Here's the thesis, plainly. The popular story says the 2008 recession killed General Motors, or that GM just built bad cars. Both are true enough to feel right and wrongs enough to miss everything. GM filed in 2009, but it went insolvent in slow motion for decades. The balance sheet, loaded with fixed promises made in good years, is what decided that GM could not survive a downturn it had survived before. Not the moment, the obligations. And so, back to the weight. Every car General Motors ever built rolled off the line owing something to a worker who had already gone home for good. Promises made in the good years, promises that came due in the bad ones. The assembly line never stopped moving, and it never stopped owing. For 50 years, the company carried it because the good years hid the weight. The moment the good years ended, the weight was still there, and this time, it was heavier than the company. That is the anatomy of General Motors. The recession didn't kill it. The recession just presented the bill. The case closes, but the pattern doesn't. Somewhere right now, the company is signing a promise it can only keep in a boom. The case queue continues, and the next anatomy is already on the table. If you want the next case before it goes public, join the free corporate anatomy briefing. The link is in the description.